I'm so pleased to introduce Emma Donoghue this evening to read from and discuss her new novel, Frog Music. Set in California in the late 1800s, the novel's based on a real unresolved crime that occurred when a frog catcher named Jenny Bonnet was shot in a grimy bar on the outskirts of San Francisco. The prolific Emma Donoghue is the author of many books, including a variety of genres, including 4 short story collections and 7 novels, among them the best-selling Room, which was shortlisted for both the Man Booker and Orange Prizes. The book's just out and getting strong reviews, and I gather from an interview she did on Morning Edition recently that there's the possibility we might even be able to get her to sing, but she was being a little coy about that, so we'll see. Please help me welcome Emma Donoghue.
I'm not only excited to be back at Politics Prose, but I'm honoured because I understand that competition for one of these many reading slots at this bookstore is white hot. And I think the intellectual ferment in the atmosphere, do you notice it's making the building vibrate slightly? Is it just me? I can feel it throbbing under my feet. It's very bad form to be travelling with a different edition. This is the British edition. Actually, it's the Irish edition. It's a trade paperback because the Irish, for some reason, are too cheap to buy hardbacks. So publishers have given in and they publish paperbacks from the start for the Irish. Shame on my race. And when you're travelling hand baggage only, as you know, every bit counts. If my own book is a paperback, I can afford to have somebody else's paperback with me as well, which is always a good thing. This book was meant to be about Jenny Bonnet, who I heard about 15 years ago. An oddball of the highest order. She lived as if she knew she was going to be killed at 27. She was a child actress who went off the rails and ended up as a shepherd and then as a professional frog catcher, supplying frogs to the restaurant trade in San Francisco, the Chinese and the French restaurants. And she was not only arrested roughly monthly by San Francisco's authorities for wearing the attire of the opposite sex, but she was just about the only person on whom they exerted this particular law they had on their books. In the city records you can see it'll say, arrested for drunkenness, 3,000 people, arrested for cross-dressing, 1. So she was it. She was it. And yet, I'm very interested in the history of cross-dressing, but most of it is the history of people desperately hiding and disguising themselves and keeping their head down. Jenny Bonnet flaunted herself. She'd go through the streets. Everyone knew she was a woman. She was in pants. The police were harassing her. She picked fights in bars. She had this sense of humour that just jumps across the centuries at you. So, as I say, it was meant to be Jenny's book. But when Jenny was shot through a window, and that's not really a spoiler because it's the opening page of my book, there was another woman in the room who happened to be leaning down undoing her shoes at the time, so came away unscathed. And that woman was a French burlesque dancer, well, that's a euphemism, dirty dancer, called Blanche Benot. And the novel turns out to be very much Blanche's story. Not only does she narrate it, but her own complicated life. She was a recent immigrant from France with her lover Arthur and his best friend Ernest. And this strange little bohemian ménage à trois, they all lived in Chinatown in San Francisco in the 1870s. And this strange little triangle seems to have been completely disrupted by them all getting to know the fight-picking, show-off Jenny Bonnet in the summer of 76. That was also, very helpfully for me, an extraordinarily hot summer. San Francisco suspended its usual foggy climate and it had record-breaking temperatures all the way through the summer. And strangely enough, there was also an awful smallpox epidemic. So it was just a freak year for San Francisco. I couldn't have chosen it better. Now, Blanche is what she would like to call an independent agent. She dances at a brothel called the House of Mirrors, but she doesn't live upstairs. She's not one of the girls. She's a free agent. And she earns money for her dancing from the Prussian madam of the brothel, Madame Joanna Werner, another real person. This book is so full of real people. I think I only had to make up 2 or 3 fictional ones. I had to make up a nice journalist. For some reason, I couldn't find any real ones there. But almost everybody in the book is from history. So Blanche earns money for dancing and also takes the odd rendezvous with rich millionaires passing through town. So in this scene, she's gone to pick up her wages from Madame Joanna Werner. who's a very severe and austere kind of brothel keeper. And Blanche also, Madame Joanna Werner has arranged childcare for Blanche because Blanche and Arthur have this inconvenient baby. And so Madame has arranged for the baby to be farmed out and to be brought once a month for Blanche to have a look at him and see is he progressing all right. They're busy, they're in their 20s. You know, you can't see to every little thing. So in this scene, yes, Blanche has been picking up her wages from Madame Werner. By the way, these Hoffmans who've been minding our Petit Arthur, and then Blanche realises she doesn't quite know how to phrase the question. Is it far enough outside the city to be safe, would you say? Is the air, Blanche strains for the English word, salubrious? It occurs to her only now that while she, Arthur and Ernest all got their scratches the last time the smallpox hit, the same isn't true of Petit. No doubt they've vaccinated the babies? No doubt, says Madame. Blanche tries again. Have the Hoffmans quite a few little ones in their care? The Prussian is looking into her cash box now. She licks a finger to count a stack of notes and she says, "Children have such a relish for company, don't they?" Was that an answer? Blanche wonders. Perhaps I should pay Petit a visit there, on the farm, she says tentatively. The widow purses her pale lips. I know it's not our usual procedure, says Blanche, but these are not ordinary times. Madame Joanna shakes her head. Frau Hoffmann finds that parents disrupt the routines. Blanche bristles at that. Routines? That makes that place sound more like a school or a hospital than a home for little babies. How many infants could there be lodging with one family of farmers? Blanche supposes she should have looked into this matter before, but at the end of each visit, frankly, she's always been grateful to wave goodbye as the nurse totes her small burden away in his basket. One of these days it'll be different. One of these days Petit will be grown enough that everything will be different. He will sit up, stand, finally stretch out his arms to Mamma, ready to be carried back to their apartment on Sacramento Street to see his papa, maybe even to stay with them when the time is right. I'm just a touch anxious because of the heat and the epidemic, she tells Madame now. Naturally, says Madame, but your little one is very well. How do you know? Well, Frau Hoffmann would have informed me if the case were otherwise, says Madame. And this is where Blanche should probably accept her 100 in worn notes, pull on her lace gloves, pick up her parasol and say her merci. But there's something veiled in the Madame's tone that's bothering Blanche. Where do they live exactly? Says Blanche. A hiss of breath from the German. If you are irrational enough to insist on putting the child at greater risk in order to set your mind at rest, I will have him brought here this very afternoon. Well, I just find it a little odd, says Blanche, that you don't seem to want me to see this farm. An elegant shrug of the silk-covered shoulders. You are a free woman, but I find it equally odd, adds Madame with an implacable smile, that you're suddenly so curious after almost a year. Blanche is on her feet now, knuckles on the carved bureau. What's the damn address? Madame Joanna seems to be weighing something. Folsom, she says at last. But Blanche has never heard of a village by that name. She stares. Folsom Street? That's just downtown in the Mission. Blanche has probably gone past that door 100 times. I wonder how you picked up the impression it was outside the city, says Madame. Well, you've always called it a farm. Whereabouts on Folsom Street? Demands Blanche. Sit down, Madame sighs. You've proved your point, Blanche. Underneath that famously snowy décolletage beats a mother's heart. I will send for him this minute if you like. Blanche sees red. What number on Folsom Street? 1422. Blanche strides towards the door and then turns back to snatch up her parasol and gloves. I always thought we understood each other, murmurs Madame Werner. That August afternoon the air is unbearable, chalky with dust. The harpist is still on his stool outside the House of Mirrors, but struggling with a tune from some Verdi opera now. Squinting out from under the pinked edge of her ivory parasol, Blanche waits impatiently for a horse car. But when it comes, there's a boy hanging off the back whose pocks look very moist. What's he doing out of bed? Blanche shudders and turns away, looking for a cab instead, realising now that she dashed off without getting her wages at all, as impulsive as some green girl. The cabby spots her wave and he brakes at the last moment, so the sweating horse almost tramples her. The man doesn't bother getting down. 1422 Folsom, Blanche calls up to him, climbing into the little carriage, and she slams the door shut herself. They pass a crumpled brown shape in the street being winched into a cart. That's the third dead horse Blanche has seen this week. In the endless heat, the hills of the city are breaking the poor hacks. No circus pony Blanche had the handling of ever endured so much. The cab turns down 10th Street into the Mission now, and the variety of pale faces strikes her. Italians, Irish, Prussians, all living cheek by jowl. Blanche rather dreads reaching her destination. If these Hoffmans are not farmers, what are they? And under what conditions has her son been living for most of a year? She spots a swarm of kids kneeling around an ice block that's fallen off a cart, still bristling with straw. They're all licking it eagerly. Children are said to be the most susceptible, she thinks. So how could this neighbourhood be any healthier for babies than Chinatown, where she and Arthur lives? Blanche was misled from the start. Goddamn Madame Joanna and her Prussian friends. Number 1422 turns out to be next door to a Chinese laundry that sends coils of smoke in all directions. It's a wary adolescent who answers the door, not the uniformed nurse who usually brings Petit to the House of Mirrors for his visits. "Doctors has just stepped out," she mutters. Blanche is hit by the eye-watering reek of shit. "Who's this doctress?" she demands. "Doctors Hoffman. She just stepped out. Wish to leave a message? What name?" Blanche has been steeling her nerves against the noise, expecting bedlam, babies shrieking, but this silence is worse. "Where do you keep the infants?" she asks, and the nursemaid's eyes flicker. "Doctors has just stepped out." "Yes, she's just stepped out, I know, but what I want to know is where is my son?" "What name?" says the girl. Donoghue. His name is his father's name, Donoghue. Blanche pushes past the rigid girl and she tries the first door on the right, which opens. "No, that's for appointments," says the girl, and she yanks the knob and shuts the door again. But not before Blanche catches a glimpse of a narrow bed, a sink and a rack of instruments, and she realises what appointments must mean. The girl has more grit than one would expect. She takes up her stand between Blanche and the second door, her arms out. "They're having their nap," she says. Blanche's pulse is hammering in her throat now. "I pay $8 a week for my son's care and lodging, and I believe I have the right to see him." While the nursemaid is still blinking at her, Blanche shoves past her and opens the door. So dark. That's what strikes her first, even more than the hot distillation of the stink. Her eyes fight to make sense of the dim shapes. Crib after metal crib, littered with small limbs. "Oh, Christ, open the shutters!" "That'll only let more heat in," the girl protests. Blanche fumbles her way to the window and forces her skirt between two cribs. "Which one is yours?" asks the girl. And instead of answering, Blanche grabs a handle and winches till light slants across the room. Weak, goatish cries go up from the babies. 2 small ones in one crib, 3 in the next, 3 in the next. Tear-shaped glass bottles in their mouths, or gone crusty on their chests, or lost in corners of the crib, with black rubber teats dribbling onto the sheets. Every baby is tangled in the same size garment, once white. Eyes closed, or blinking wetly, or open and vacant. All big and small, strangely inanimate. With a sensation like a blow to her chest, Blanche finally recognises the tribe her son belongs to. There's one black face, 1 or 2 infants who could be Indians, but most of them are pallid. Pinching her nose to shut out the smell, Blanche's eyes slide from crib to crib, and she can't see Petit anywhere. Then the foot of a face-down sleeping baby flickers and curls, and with a pounding relief, Blanche spots the soft sole, and she seizes it and then scoops up her son. He seems so much bigger since she saw him last, and she presses kisses all over his howling face. "I said that one's a girl," says the nursemaid. Blanche is scarlet. Depositing the stranger child back in her crib, she wipes the foreign tears off her own mouth. "Upset her, so you did, picking her up that way?" complains the nursemaid. "Are you telling me that they lie here all day in their own dirt with nobody picking them up?" roars Blanche, her eyes scanning the shadowy corners of the room. "I do what I can," says the girl. But Blanche is not listening, because she has recognised Petit at last in the end crib. She approaches cautiously in case he turns into another changeling. But no, that is him, lying on his side, gigantic eyes sunken above patches of hot red skin, watching his mother's through the bar as if she's a wild beast. His bulging forehead, but Arthur's pencil-thin eyebrows arching across it. How could Blanche not have known her baby? He's chewing on something mushroom-shaped. Blanche holds out her hands to him with an attempt at a smile, but he doesn't stir. She lifts Petit carefully. His small garment is limp with sweat. He lets out a sob and then a convulsive cough, and Blanche feels such pity suddenly that she presses him to her and registers a surge of warmth against her bodice. Love, she thinks in shock. Love flaring up between herself and this sobbing baby. Love so hot she can feel it on her skin. And then the heat dies away and she realises what it is. He's pissed on her. The nursemaid is moving from crib to crib, slotting bottles back into mouths. Blanche can't bear this stinking room a moment longer. She's very tempted to set down the wailing, sobbing bundle that is Petit exactly where she found him. But of course she won't. She can't. She never could do that now that she knows what it's like here. She couldn't look herself in the face. So she pulls him onto her hip and she makes for the passage. The shirt, if you please. The girl is standing too close to her. What? What are you talking about? Shouts Blanche over the baby's cries. I need the nightshirt back, says the girl. Is this a joke? Any parent that own clothing to be provided on departure, see, says the girl, with the rapid delivery of a memorised lesson. 'Cause it's the doctress's property. Doctress Hoffman is particular about it. For a moment, Blanche is tempted to pull the sodden rag of a nightshirt over Petit's head and throw it in the girl's face. Instead, she steps away, but the girl clings to Petit's hem. The shirt or its value, she pleads, or the doctress will dock me. Here's its value, says Blanche, and she spits on the floor. The girl's grip has shifted to Petit's tiny foot. Take your hands off my son! Blanche yanks him away, and Petit is still weeping now as his reddened mouth fastens onto the black thing in his fist, and he twists away from Blanche as best he can. The girl mutters, I reckon he knows my hands better than yours. And the truth of that fills Blanche with a wild fury, and her fist is coming around to club the girl to the floor. But then she hears a sound. It's a tiny sound, and it catches Blanche's attention only because it's coming from the wrong room. Not from the room she's just walked out of, where a couple of the babies are whining now, but from behind the door on the left. She listens hard. The sound is gone. Perhaps she imagined it. What's in there? The nursemaid's face tightens. You've got more of them? Asks Blanche, incredulous. And the girl says something that sounds to Blanche like, yours is a weakly. But that makes no sense. A weakling? Is that what the girl means? That he's weak? He's a what? Blanche asks. You pay by the week, see? So yours is a weekly, the nursemaid says, pointing to Petit, whose sobs have calmed to little moans now. Through there, she jerks her head towards the room on the left. Well, we call them the paid-ups, because they're all paid up. A lump sum paid in full at the start. You get me? Blanche gets her. And black spots float past Blanche's eyes, and she thinks she might fall. And she seizes the handle of the door on the left, but the girl's hand locks over hers. How many babies is Blanche going to find stacked in each crib in that room, alive in name only, sucking on, what, milk diluted down to cloudy water? Will they be glazed-eyed and crone-faced with tiny bones showing through translucent skin? Nobody's coming back for the paid-ups. It's not that Blanche wants to open this door. She's never wanted anything less, but she must. Somebody must open that door. Blanche is beginning to twist the knob despite the girl's resistance. She is going in. That's what she'll always tell herself afterwards. She is on the very point of marching in there and hurling the shutters open and letting in the remorseless light when Petit in her arms bursts out coughing. The patches on his cheek, as rough as split wood, flare up as if burning. He whoops wetly. He writhes and flails on Blanche's hip, almost slips to the floor. Is that what her son wants most, to get away from her? Well, damn his ungrateful little hide. She lets go of the door handle and she locks both arms around him tightly. The nursemaid swerves across the hall and opens the front door for Blanche to leave. Keep the shirt, she gabbles, gesturing as if to shoo the pair of them out. I'll tell the doctress the laundry lost it. This place, says Blanche, as if her tongue is made of iron. Tell your doctress she could be had up on charges. Before she knows it, she's out on the step and the door has thudded shut behind her. Are there in fact any charges? Blanche doesn't know that a baby has what you would call a right to anything in law. And what could she tell the police if she rushed off to report this Doctor's Hoffman? And if they ask how carefully Blanche inspected that house on Folsom Street before she left her infant there for more than 11 months? Oh no, you see, she would have to say, I left all the arrangements to my madam. At least she's out of that awful place. She and Petit both are. And a kind of exhilaration pulses through her. His coughing suddenly cuts off. Blanche gives him a look to check his breathing. Petit's eyes are squeezed tight against the daylight. Now she can see his skin is corpse pale. There's a humid rash all around his mouth where he's sucking on that black object, which turns out to be an old doorknob. What a thing to chew on. Petit lets out a little hiccup, and for the moment he resembles nothing so much as a little old dipso. Blanche almost laughs. She will rise above the fact that her white silk bodice is patchy with urine. She puts her son's face close to her and she plants a kiss on his forehead, just one little soft bisou, the kind she's often seen mothers in the street dropping on their babies' heads. Just a little bisou. And he howls as if her touch is poisonous. All right, no bisou, she snaps. On a hunch, she turns him halfway around so he's looking at the street, and he calms at once. In the cab, the baby shies away from the air blowing in his face, so Blanche has to slide the window shut, which makes the cab stifling. Looking out through the smeary glass, she describes the city for him, pointing at every oyster stall and cement wagon. Petit blinks, expressionless. It occurs to her to wonder how far babies can see. He seems more interested in his doorknob. When she tries to pry it out of his slippery fingers, he lashes out with it, cracking her on the eye. Bordel! The pain is startling. Her mother would have smacked him right back to teach him. But Blanche's hand falters. If the tiny fellow wants to hold on to the one plaything he's used to, who is she to take away? There's a Chinese funeral going by on Sacramento. Drums and gongs pounding, firecrackers going off, and dozens of white-robed keeners trailing by. Enough fuss that it must be a man, and probably an elderly one. Blanche gets out of the cab opposite her building, number 815, with Petit in her arms, and on an impulse she steps forward to show him the cab horse, putting them face to face. Might her son grow up to have her talent for riding? Regarde le beau cheval! And then correcting herself because he'll have to be an American. Nice horsey! The tired animal blows out through his nostrils and Petit bursts into shrieks of fright. Blanche clutches his lashing limbs. Shh, 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 shh. She hushes him. Home to Papa now, looking up at the second floor. I'll leave that there. Thank you very much. So I understand I have to strongly encourage you all to come up here and ask your questions from the podium as if it's like a consciousness-raising group or a fiery town hall meeting. I think that's great because I've had a lot of readings where the mic gets passed along like in a chat show and, I think that's a bit limp and consumerist. I think coming up here and seizing the mic is going to make a far better performance. Oh, see? But you still have to stand up. Who's going to impress everybody by being first?
I haven't read Frog Music yet, but I was mesmerized by Room.
Thank you.
And Room is what has brought me back to you. It was a life-changing experience for me. Sometimes we thought that we had a rough childhood, not, all the pink and roses there. But when you read this book, you see that, that it can get worse. I thoroughly enjoy your reading right now, and I look forward to read the Frog Music. And I think you're an extraordinary writer, and I thank you so much for being here today. That's all.
That was a gratuitous compliment disguised as a question.
So I have a question,
Go for it.
though I also loved Room. I actually read Astray, your collection of short stories, which are historically based. And I was wondering if you wrote the short stories first and then wrote Frog Music, or were they written at the same time, as writers often do? You sort of get that idea in your head and it explodes.
The short stories came first. And in a way, I've been writing on and off very fact-inspired historical fiction since my novel Slammerkin back in
Right, which I
2000.
read
So
that too.
I would say that oh, you're good. So I would say my method is unchanged. What's changed with the last two books, I suppose, is the territory, in that Room was set in America, and then Astray is all about people moving to or across America and Canada. So I think it's a belated effect of my emigration. I moved from Ireland to England at 20 and then to Canada at 28. And so, I always say to my friends, feel free to confide in me. It takes 10 years for it to turn into fiction. You'll be living in another city by the time I steal your story. But I think my move to North America is sort of gradually showing up in my fiction. And this is my first historical novel set in the States. But I would say this one is quite related to Astray in that Astray was all about emigration and the pros and cons of emigration, and the fact that, of course, you can reinvent yourself, but you've also always brought your baggage. And I'm fascinated by those tiny changes and continuities in the lives of emigrants. And I suppose one thing that drew me to the real events behind Frog Music is that they were all immigrants, and Jenny's parents had come over as hopeful French actors to entertain the miners, and when she was only about 3, and then Blanche and Arthur and Ernest were some of the many French people who just decided in a time of economic recession, San Francisco looks a lot better than here. In fact, the French government organised a lottery and the prizes were tickets to San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
So it was the dream place to go. I mean, it still is. You go to San Francisco now and there are just so many homeless people. It's as if this is just the end of the line. It's where you keep going till you stop. I'm fascinated by emigration, having done it twice. And in a way, this novel is a strange kind of, there's clearly a mathematical term I need. It's the overlapping sets of my preoccupation with motherhood and my preoccupation with emigration and my preoccupation with prostitution as well. I seem to write about it a lot. For somebody who doesn't have any sordid episodes in my own adolescence, I've never had to sell it, not yet anyway. And yet I've ended up writing 2 novels about a prostitute now, as well as the odd short story. And I think it's because it's the job that symbolises all other jobs. It's the most elemental trade. It's the first thing you could sell before you get into complicated industrialized economies. But I was determined to make this novel very different from Slammerkin, because in my novel Slammerkin, set in the Welsh borders in the 18th century, prostitution is completely grim. She's a teenager on the streets. It's all very brutalizing and numbing. So when I knew that I wanted to write about this murder and that the survivor of the murder was a good time girl, I thought, okay, I can't make her another grim, unhappy prostitute. This one is going to like it, which of course is a far more dangerous approach to take, because I wouldn't want anyone to finish the novel and think I'm saying, oh yeah, it was great trade. Oh yes, I recommend it. But I want to at least start the novel with Blanche thinking, this works. And also I find it ethically more interesting to take somebody who is not only selling sex, but, she has no sense of boundaries or limits. She's mildly masochistic. She just thinks, whatever happens, sex is great. And so I thought it would be lovely to take somebody like her and find moments where she learns to say no. I think that's a far more interesting story than a woman who from the start knows that this is a dreadful and exploitative trade, But not everybody will agree. Somebody last week said to me, I was reading your book and I read a scene that I really didn't approve of, and I thought, well, I'll let her away with it because of her previous books. And she said to me, are you counting on that factor? Are you counting on the fact that, your previous books in a way justify your approach to gender and sex? And I said, are you kidding? I would never assume my readers have been working their way through my crazily zigzag back catalogue. I'm not one of those writers who's got, the loyal fans who once a year on Mother's Day buy the book, My career has been wildly zigzag, so to find somebody who's read several of my books is a thrill.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to Frog Music.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's my turn. Okay. This week, I think it was, I read an interview with you where you talked about your favorite books, and I thought, oh no, not another one. Meaning, you have this fascination, it seems, with the 19th century, and you said Charles Dickens was your favorite writer, and I said I've never wanted to read him. Now does that mean I have to? Because my favorite poet, Sinead Morrissey, said her favorite book was Vanity Fair, and when I saw it was 800 pages long, I said, what is with these women that they want to read this stuff? And you've based a few novels in the 19th century, so is that just
I think
random?
You have to read him. I do. You could say I was indoctrinated early in that I grew up on classics of 19th century literature. I clearly didn't have enough of a social life as a child, because I remember putting together a family tree of the generations in Wuthering Heights so that I could tell one Kathy from another. I mean, I didn't do things like learn to skip, I've never hung from monkey bars. You'd think I could have spent a bit more of my childhood on those key childhood skills, but no, family trees have gone with the wind and Wuthering Heights. Loser! It's been a fairly specialist life, There's been a lot of Charles Dickens and not much healthy exercise in the outdoors. But yes, I do think you should read him, yes.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
Yeah. And of course, you have to read him remembering that he was a Victorian. So when he produces these incredibly sanctimonious good girls, you have to just forget about them and concentrate on the more vivid and interesting and bad characters.
Okay.
One thing I really enjoyed about writing frog music is that I've spent so many years now with the good young mother in room, Ma, not only writing the book, but then publicising it forever, it seemed like. I know I shouldn't complain, but it was just bizarre. We're all used to our books quietly dying, so to have this one keep coming back like a zombie, very strange. And also I've been writing the screenplay, endless drafts of that. We hope it'll be filmed this year. So I can't get away from that heroic young mother, and I've always felt like a terrible mother by contrast with my fictional creation. Whereas Blanche, compared with her, I'm doing very well, Every day that I feed my children a nutritious chicken nugget and bring them to a piano class, that's a triumph over circumstances.
You seem to have the eye of Jane Austen and the rhythm of James Joyce. How close did I come?
Oh, I'm too pleased by that compliment. I'm memorizing it. I don't want to get back to my room tonight and go, what did he say I was? Something very nice. That's not a question. Come on, ask me something difficult.
Well, I guess my question is, when you read it, it had a rhythm which was remarkable and is somewhat Irish. When you write it, does it seem to come out that way?
I suppose it does, and my style really depends on the book, on the story I'm telling. A great sort of breakthrough for me was that I wrote my first two novels set in contemporary Ireland, so I had my people speak pretty much the way I did. And then for my third book, I did a book of fairy tales, and suddenly it was a totally different language. And I found it absolutely wonderful to sort of take a break from a style that you've been used to. So I find with this one, say, the American rhythms of dialogue, especially with Jenny, I developed a kind of a funny grammar for her where she drops the first few words of each sentence. She never says I. She'll say like, been riding around town. She'll never say, I have been riding around town. So I really enjoyed introducing those new rhythms. But I would be honoured if, in fact, I've been influenced by either Austen or Joyce. And actually, it's a delightful thought because they would have hated each other. You can tell. Each of them would have been like, let me lift my skirts away from that man's puddle. But they're both wonderful. I did grow up on both of them, and that's a great combination.
Thank you.
Lady in the lovely tights.
Oh, thanks. So yeah, I've also read a number of your books and loved them, so thank you. And I'm really into your historical novels, which have been this one and Astray recently. I think my favorite actually is Landing, and I was wondering if you were ever going to get into anything like that again, where it's more contemporary, sort of.
I would love to go back to the contemporary. Yeah, I feel every few years I want to do one of each. I don't feel any permanent conversion to either historicals or to contemporary. They each just satisfy me in different ways, And I suppose I get to put more of my own stuff into the contemporary, which is always a pleasure. Actually, at the moment I'm trying to write a kids' book, and I think it's probably fulfilling that function for me in that it's set nowadays, and I get to lift lines directly from my friends and plop them in with no 10-year interval. And I certainly get to just just throw in a lot of the detritus of everyday life. And of course, contemporary stuff takes research too, because I don't have a good enough memory to just, describe the modern world while sitting in my room. I still need to check things. My novel Landing, which is one of the main characters is a flight attendant. I needed to do a lot of research to get that right, because they don't just walk up and down the aisle. There's a lot of work with those little latches and so I read a lot of blogs in which flight attendants complain about their terrible passengers, and then passengers complain about the terrible flight attendants. I really, really enjoyed doing that one, and I would definitely like to go back to contemporary. I just can't tell.
I'm just curious about the baby farm. Was it in San Francisco? Was it records you found somewhere else? How realistic?
There were lots of them. Now they varied. Some of them, like at the most infanticidal end of the spectrum, there were certain women who would advertise in the paper, foster home for your little one, and then you turn up, hand over the baby, hand over a bit of money, and then she would throw the baby down a well, right? So there are a few outright serial killer setups. And then there were other ones that, they had a high death rate, but frankly, so did the city orphanages. So they were probably not much worse and in some ways better. I mean, there were so few situations in which, if you were, say, a single mother, you could have your baby with you at home. You would need to be able to afford the space and live in care. San Francisco, very few people wanted to be servants. It was the city of freedom, so a lot of young women preferred to work in factories and so on. They were very resistant to the idea of live-in service. So putting your baby in full-time childcare, it was a thing that many people felt driven to, and they only tended to be called baby farms once they hit the papers. There were a series of exposés, first in Britain in the 1860s, and then a bit more slowly it began to happen in the States. And in each case, one journalist would start digging up examples of hideous baby institutions, and then there'd be a brief scandal about it and a brief prosecution. But you get the feeling it just quietly went on, until women were able to have babies without embarrassment. You know what I mean? Until the stigma was gone, there had to be somewhere to stash those babies. There was one in Philadelphia. I think I got my prices from one in Philadelphia. It took me ages to track down how much you would pay. And I definitely found one of the farms which had this 2-room system, which gave me chills in particular. So San Francisco was no more known for it than anywhere else, but I think in every major city in the Western world they did exist, yeah. And there are ones that are far worse than that. There are ones which were more obviously murderous, I seem to research so many disgusting things. And with researching Room, because there is no one real Jack in the world, I had to look at a lot of cases of children raised in weird shut-away ways and the ways in which we damage and neglect children, and I thought I was done with that, and then I found myself doing the same thing a century and a half earlier, Sorry.
Actually, that's a perfect segue to my question. I was going to ask you about your transition from Room to frog music. I don't know the time lapse between the two, but I mean, it just seems like such a... I read Room and it was a huge tearjerker, and I just wanted to get your take on that.
I was delighted to have such a different project to move on to, because I was so startled by the success of Room, the sheer number of countries it was sold in, and I think it sold over 2 million copies. So I just would hate anyone to think that I was trying to court that success by writing some kind of equivalent. And besides, Room is such an odd story, it would be very obvious if you tried to do any equivalent or sequel or spin-off. I get requests all the time to tell it all over again from Ma's point of view or a therapist's point of view. I think that would be the worst. Can you imagine? And I get asked for sequels, and I always vow, never, 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 I don't care how broke I might end up, how bankrupt, I'm never going to write a sequel. Doesn't need a sequel, because I hope Ma and Jack get to live as normal a life as possible. I hope they're not living in any way which needs a story, But I already knew that I wanted to do frog music next, and I'd done quite a lot of the research, and so having that totally different world to jump into was such a relief to me, yeah. Yeah, and just a lovely contrast. And I was quite surprised that the baby theme then came up so strongly in this one, because I wasn't looking for similarities. Yeah. I think I'll probably look back at my career at the end and go, oh wow, having babies really obsessed me for the next 6 books,
You've touched on this a bit already, but I was wondering how you do your research, like how you figure out what you need to know. Like a lot of people here, I've read Room, and I was just blown away. And there's a lot that, without going into spoilery detail, there seems to be a lot of stuff that you touched on involving like the physiological effects of growing up in that kind of place. And then now with the excerpt that you read from Frog Music, it really felt very immersive in the time and place that you were writing about, which is just completely different. How do you figure out what you need and then get that?
Well, interestingly, the baby farm stuff, nobody left very detailed accounts, so I used a lot of modern material. I thought, what's the nearest equivalent? Okay, one of those hideous orphanages. I'm thinking, say, Romania was notorious for its orphanages. So I looked at cases where a baby would be adopted internationally out of one of those orphanages. And what I was asking myself was, how plausible it is that a child could recover? And I found remarkable blogs, for instance, where a child would arrive in North America, very undersized and weak and emotionally shut down, and then they would start to thrive so fast. And teeth, one mother wrote about how her new baby, sprouted teeth almost overnight. It was frightening. It's as if all that amazing potential to thrive was there just under the surface, So in that case, I used modern sources. But mostly, I would say for this book, the biggest change about this book is that a lot of what I was using I found online, partly because 1870s is relatively modern. So, there's a lot of genealogical stuff. There are a lot of censuses, birth records, baptismal records, marriage records, and the Mormon database, for instance, is just fantastically complete. I found one of the characters in this book, I found him getting married 2 months after the murder in the Mormon database. So I used a lot of sources that I wouldn't have been able to find for, say, an 18th century book, but also I wouldn't have literally been able to find them unless they were online. So the internet is such a gift to writers these days, especially if you don't have the personal freedom to leave your small family behind and go off visiting archives all over the world. I found that with subscription databases like, say, Ancestry.com, you can track down so many people, and it was such a pleasurable task for me. I would take, say, the neighbours, the people who were living round about where Jenny got shot, and I would literally track them down and find out were they literate, what age were they, how many kids had they, that sort of thing. So I don't decide in advance what I need. I just do a huge amount of research and then pluck out the interesting details. And I could never say hire somebody else to do the research for me, because I don't just want the gist, and I certainly don't want a summary. And I don't want, the standard view of something. I want the odd details. So there's just no substitute for spending hour after hour after hour following up those tangents and being willing to throw it all away. I mean, luckily it's all enjoyable to me anyway. But you have to be quite ruthless about, saying, oh, that interesting, those observations on the gold rush, there's no room for them in here, just let them go. So.
Thank you.
Well, you do have some fans who buy your books as they come out every year. The first book of yours that I think it was your first one, Stir Fry.
Oh, you're a grade A fan. You go all the way back.
Well, when you spoke at the Shakespeare Library, you signed it for me, so thank you. And, that was a really important book for me. And I've just every year been looking for, what's next. I think I have them all, and I love them all. Everything, literary, nonfiction, fiction, historical, contemporary. So my friend who just read Landing on my recommendation noticed something I think I missed, which in my head I've always been pronouncing Jude's name as Jude, but she said there was a line where Jude said it's not like in the song Hey Jude. Is it pronounced differently?
No, I think it is pronounced like that. Huh. I can't remember why she says that. Hey Jude. I'll have to check that reference later.
Okay.
No, I think it's Jude, and the other one is Sheila.
Yeah, Sheila. I had to look that one up, too.
Yeah. Anyway, that was another bit of praise disguised as a question. Come on. I thought there'd be much more of a town hall atmosphere.
Hi. I actually have 2 questions. I hope that's not cheating. So I teach literature over at a local university, and we read Room in my class, and my students loved it. And they wanted me to ask you, they're very interested in the screenplay that you're writing. I mentioned that to them. So they wanted to know kind of what that was like, writing the screenplay, what challenges you faced. And they were curious to know how different it will be, with the point of view challenge there that you had to face. And I think I read there would be no voiceover. So they were just curious. I don't know how much you can say, but they wanted to know more, and I do too. And my second question, I'm a big fan of Kissing the Witch, and I wasn't sure if you had any advice for writers who are interested in retelling fairy tales, putting them in new skins, because you do a great job of that. So those are my questions.
Okay, I'll start with the advice for reworking of fairy tales. The great thing about the fairy tales is that they're just endlessly reworkable. You know, I love, just as in frog music, I use a lot of folk songs because I think if things have been passed on by the oral tradition, then there's just something magical about them. There's just something powerful enough that people in every generation have bothered to learn them and have bothered to change them. And fairy tales are the fictional equivalent of that. So I suppose if I was tackling fairy tales today, I would probably maybe look elsewhere than in the most traditional European ones that I used. You know, I think there's probably a lot to be said for exploring the kind of less familiar edges in terms of source material. But also, I think those of us who first started rewriting fairy tales, I mean, I certainly followed in the footsteps of Angela Carter. I think there was a very, very strong interest at first in, you know, the relations between men and women, basically. Should Cinderella wait for her prince? Whereas now I would say they're all, you know, that's been very much explored, and I think there are a lot of other interesting themes that come out of them now. You know, there's so much interesting stuff about, you know, the monsters and the beasts in fairy tales, and it's interesting, there's been such a rise in vampire literature and in celebrations of basically the freak, you know, kind of a welcoming back of the freak, the werewolf, even the zombie. So I think looked at in that light, fairy tales probably have a lot to offer us in terms of the portrayal of the beast, you know. About the screenplay of Room, yes, I did rashly say that there'd be no voiceover. Now, under my director's pressure, we are including a little bit of voiceover at the moment, but I mean, who knows what'll make it into the final film. I always remind myself that, you know, at the point where the script is finished, my powers will end and a lot will end up on the cutting room floor. But weirdly enough, I'm really, really enjoying adapting it. And I'm working really harmoniously with this brilliant Irish director, Lenny Abrahamson. I wasn't looking for somebody Irish at all because it's not an Irish book, but he wrote me this 10-page letter of extreme brilliance, just completely understanding the book and saying how he would translate it to the screen. And I thought, he gets it. And I've guarded the film rights to Room really, really firmly. There's been a lot of interest over the years, and I've just turned down everybody who didn't seem right, because this particular book, I wouldn't want Room to end up either a soppy saccharine film or a, you know, sleazy rape film. So I really felt I wanted to wait until I found the perfect people. And I've absolutely loved working with Lenny, and strangely enough, I had got a stack of books on, you know, classic Hollywood script writing, you know, because I wanted to turn it into a film that lots of people would want to see. So I thought, okay, I've got to look at the plot, at ways to make it move more like a film does. So I made quite a few changes, and the director has been making me gently unpick almost all of those. He keeps saying, nah, that's a bit too Hollywood, or that's a bit too TV, let's go back to the book. So it's unprecedented to be in a working relationship where the director is saying, let's check page 300 again, you know. So it's not that it's exactly like the book, but I think both of us are very, very focused on finding sort of equivalent tricks, equivalent magic, equivalent ways of making the reader care. And I would say it's still very much like the book, even structurally in terms of the escaping in the middle, the point of view being the child's. People keep saying to me, oh, well, obviously you'll have put in the kidnap scene. And I go, no, I'm not trying to compete with every other film about a kidnapped girl, you know. To me, the child's story is what makes it unique. And of course, it'll be different in a film because you're not in the child's head. I think the advantage of the film will be that you will really see the mother. Whereas in the book, you see Ma only through Jack's point of view, so it's very sort of veiled. I would say the film will be really her film just as much as Jack's, you know. And so fingers crossed it should get filmed later this year, you know. We're in the middle of casting it right now. I think I can resist that temptation. Thank you. Sure.
Will the film be introduced in America as a foreign film, or is it going to be?
Good question. Will the film of Room be a foreign film? No. We'll make it. We'll make it in North America. It'll have North American talent, as they say. Yeah, it's just an Irish director who's doing it. But no, it will not be an obscure European indie movie in black and white. No. Mainstream and yet not tacky. That's what we're going for. That sweet spot between. You know what I mean. Thank you all so much. That was just lovely. Thank you.